This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
It may be Theresa May's final appearance at the EU Leaders' Summit before triggering Article 50. After Brexit and other fallout from populism, multiple voices are rising on the continent. Will more EU members break away from the Union? Immigration, economic pressures and populist tendencies. In the face of more complex challenges than ever before, what are the main objectives for this EU summit meeting? 2017 brings a number of important elections in Europe, with new faces vying for power. Will there be big disruptions, or will the EU emerge more united than ever? As the EU's second largest trading partner, China's trade with Europe is now more than €1 billion a day. Does the EU have a coherent strategy for dealing with China? How much will EU-China economic relations influence the decisions that will be made at the EU summit?
We have tons of questions. Leaders of the European Union are meeting over a two-day summit starting today to address a wide range of issues. In the aftermath of the UK's Brexit referendum and rising populist anti-trade sentiments throughout Europe and the world, the EU is facing new and highly complex challenges. Adding to this is a power struggle over the European Council presidency and added pressures to exhibit unity with this month marking the 60th anniversary of the original treaty that established the EU. What are the prospects for EU leaders to address fundamental issues? Will the Union be able to turn a corner to emerge more adaptable and better integrated? What role is China playing in Europe's economy, and what are the opportunities to improve upon EU-China ties? To discuss these topics and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Feng Zhongping, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations.
The European Union is in deep crisis, no doubt about that, but I don't think it will break up.
And Anna Tangen, an author and columnist.
Donald Trump might have been difficult for the U.S. and the world to swallow, but he well might be the savior of the EU.
Fraser Cameron, director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels, will join our discussion via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. What do you think are the major issues on the agenda for leaders attending the summit in Brussels?
I think they will talk about Brexit, for example. This is probably the last summit before the Brexit negotiation. It will start by the end of this month. So, how to have a new type of relations between UK and the rest of the European Union, and fundamentally how to address the populism. Because populism is, I believe, is the #1 enemy of the European Union. So this is the 30 years anniversary of the European integration. But now there is a widespread of speculations of that European Union may fall apart, disintegrated. So they will talk about how to save it, in other words. So I think they will talk about how to, make the economy grow again, how to deal with the refugee crisis, and how to make people to trust, to build up their faith on the European integration, European project again. That will be the major topic of this important summit, I think.
He's asking a very big question as to whether Europeans will still maintain their faith about the integrity and perhaps internal dynamics of the European economy. What do you think will be the major concerns?
Well, I really see it as an internal split between the newer entrants to the EU, especially in Eastern Europe, and the traditional elements. There's this idea on the table of what they call two-speed development. And this is garnering a lot of attention, especially from the Eastern Bloc led by Poland, who are against it, versus the traditional EU, the original members, who are for it. So it's a tale of have and have-nots to one degree or another. And it's a very interesting dynamic because economically, right, the traditional part of the EU has been slow in terms of its growth. It's actually been buoyed by the more rapid growth in the Eastern Bloc. Because if you compare them, you're talking about 4 or 5% on the Eastern Bloc versus almost the last couple of years negative numbers. Now that is changing. And I think a lot of that is going to change and continue to change because of Donald Trump's policies. The uncertainty that he brings can benefit especially the EU, which will look hopefully at what they can achieve together as opposed to what they can take from being apart.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Fraser Cameron, a senior analyst about European affairs. Hello, Fraser.
Hi.
Do you think there's a popular growing awareness about the crisis we've been discussing here in the Beijing studio about the future of the European Union, particularly multiple speeds of the development, as well as the rise of the devastating populism that may well destroy the fundamental foundation for what European Union is? What do you think?
Well, I think one has to see this in perspective. There's no populist party in any government at the moment. I don't think next week's elections in the Netherlands will bring Mr. Wilders into power. I think the other parties will form a coalition to keep him out. I don't think Madame Le Pen will win in France, and I don't think the Alternative for Deutschland will win in Germany. So I don't really think that we should exaggerate the importance of populist parties affecting the government. But it's certainly a real factor for the governments today, and they will be looking particularly at economic growth, which is the #1 item on the agenda today in Brussels, and the prospects are actually improving now for the European Union over the coming 2 or 3 years. So if we can get economic growth moving, I think this will actually be a dampener on the populist forces here.
It looks set to be a big question mark about whether the European Union is to sustain its growth. But latest figures show that the GDP growth rate of the European Union is likely to be downgraded yet another 0.1%. Do you think the major reason accounting for the economic slowdown will be a specter that is looming larger about the next round of a financial crisis in Greece and perhaps also in Italy? What do you think will be the most menacing threat?
And the most menacing threat is American protectionism. I think if America follows through on Trump's America First policy, that will have serious consequences for global trade. And we are the biggest trade partner of the United States, and China's the second. So I think for both the EU and China, that should be our main concern at the moment.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fong, Fraser brushed aside your concern about the impact of populism. Why do you think the threat of populism should be prioritized on the agenda for both European observers and for people like you?
I think, because the populism movement is actually their idea. The core of their whole idea is against integration, against economic globalization. The populist has been there, especially the far-right movement has been there in Europe for many years. But no, I agree. They are not become, control the dominate the major powers government, but they are rising. In Italy, the capital of Rome and another big important city has been, controlled now by election, by the far-right five-star movement. And after a lot of people believe after a general election in Germany, another far-right party is called Alternative for Germany. They may have the power to go, come into the parliament. So this is and crucially, the most important battle will be in France. So in less than 2 months' time, we will say whether Madame Le Pen will become the president or not. a lot of people say, no, there's no chance for her to win the second round. She will definitely become the final two to decide.
I'm going to weigh in on this also, and I agree with you. I mean, I don't understand how you can make the statement that our colleague made, given that Brexit was driven by this same kind of force. It was anti-immigration, let us get rid of this thing. We also have movements in Hungary and also Poland, and I think those can be classified as populist. So I don't think that it's correct to say, just because it isn't happening in Germany and France, that it isn't happening at all. We've already seen it. The trends are clearly there. You've pointed to the clear dangers. I think populism is very much on everybody's mind, especially what's happened in the United States. So I would have to beg to differ.
So the specter is, the haunting specter is looming larger over continental Europe. But let me cross over to Fraser Cameron for his comments on the prospect of having a very strong, if not a united far-right movement across the whole of Europe. Fraser, quite against the expectations of a majority who follow the movement of Brexit, those pro-independence forces in the UK won the vote. They won the war, not the battles, to say goodbye to continental Europe. This time around, many others, most of them elites, were repeating the same message. No, Marine Le Pen, leader of the far-right movement in France, won't be able to win the election. Do you think this time around elites and the establishment will be proved wrong again?
No, I mean, there is a possibility that she could win, but my own assessment is that the populist forces in Europe have peaked with Brexit. Brexit was a shock to everybody. Everyone's woken up. But I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm not saying you shouldn't be concerned about them. I'm saying that they're not in any government yet. And I don't think there's going to be any other country that wants to leave the EU. It's going to be very tough for Britain when it leaves the EU. They're inevitably going to get a bad deal because the 27 are going to show to everyone else that you're going to be worse off outside the EU than inside the EU. And this is going to be, I think, a real warning shot for everyone. Plus, these populist parties have no real common project, too. They're all over the place when it comes to foreign policy, to economic policy, to social policy. So it's very much a protest movement in different countries, dealing with different issues, but there's nothing that really actually brings them together, apart from a general, disregard for elites.
Perhaps our friend in Brussels has no idea why the media has been hungry for black swan events in the year 2017. The issue is whether people like Fraser Cameron in Brussels should read more of the broadsheets or pay more attention to Twitter. These days, President Donald Trump relies on Twitter for most of the most important messages he released to the general public, and there are always 42% of those die-hard supporters, whatever happened to him between his political enemy and the establishment. What do you think of the black swan that may well take place in France?
I think we couldn't really exclude this possibility, but I agree. French election system is different from that of the United States, for example. But the real problem is, even there is no black swan, even Madame Le Pen will not win the president. The problem in Europe still exists. I think that is the big problem because
we'll get more serious.
Yes, I think because a lot of people in Europe, they are so disappointed. I agree with Fraser at one point. They were so angry. They're protesting, and there's one very important message I learned from all the visitors who come to China from Europe. They say we are so disappointed. We are so pessimistic about the future. So how to address that issue? That is fundamental.
Well, our popular sentiment would just be like loose sand, not reliable. So surveys based on the changeable sentiments of the general public won't be the most important index. Having said this, Anna, what do you think of the chance for Angela Merkel to survive the media scrutiny about her flawed immigration policy, particularly her decision to accept so many refugees?
Well, the real question is who can step into her shoes. I mean, there is some restiveness. She's been one of the longest-serving chancellors in the post-World War II era. And it's just kind of this feeling that although she's handled some parts, that she's more reactive than proactive. That
Perhaps we should take a look at whether she still enjoys a solidarity within the CDU, Christian Democratic Union, the ruling party, and the coalition to some degree.
Well, her popularity numbers were down, but they're up a little bit at the moment. A lot of it depends on the events of the day. If there are anti-immigrant events, she tends to go down. If there's peace or there's economics on the table, they tend to go up. For instance, Germany just recently took on number one. China-Germany trade is now number one relationship. These are things where she can go forward and say, look, we're hedging our bets against a very, very unknown United States. And I think this is one of the things. One of the things I said earlier on is that Donald Trump could in fact save the EU. And the reason is the EU is the true competitor of the US. Any sales that are turned away, for instance, if they canceled all of the Boeing planes that China had ordered and switched to Airbus, it would be no problem for Airbus. There might be a waiting line. But the fact is, it could be done. And this is the same with medical equipment. All advanced machinery, electronics, all the things that China needs and could get easily from the EU. And
you know, it's a lot of fun for the Chinese authorities to always keep Europeans and Americans in darkness about the Boeing or Airbus, because that's our favorite
It's a
approach
competition.
to play to
exactly.
both parties.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. We are watching Dialogue with Feng Zhongping and Anna Tangen. We're talking to Fraser Cameron, who's standing by in Brussels. We keep a close eye on the agenda of the summit meeting of the European Union. The background against which this summit takes place is, of course, the Brexit, as well as what it means for the European integration in the foreseeable future. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. What's going to happen to Central and Eastern European countries regarding the future of a Schengen agreement, Anna?
Well,
The
if I knew
leaders
that,
of these countries clearly reject the idea of accepting more refugees for fear of very serious clashes between Muslims and Christians.
I think there is a solution in the sense that I think you're going to see a period of retrenchment pragmatically within the EU, where they're going to say, listen, you know, as I said, two speeds, we do our things, you can do your things. Schengen agreement might be put onto the side, but they will not be able to just say, well, we're not going to honor it, we just want it to be selectively enforced. So it's a kind of on-off switch. I think countries will perhaps, and this is going to be a topic here, how to turn that switch on and off. What is necessary to participate in the Schengen agreement versus if you want to opt out. I think that's a very pragmatic move. It could have been the difference between keeping Britain in the EU if they had come up with that before. But with such a large body, perhaps overly large, I think we were discussing this earlier, and perhaps growing larger, it's becoming more and more unwieldy.
I think part of the European problem today should be blamed about the
expansion,
you know, in 2004. More than 10 countries come to join the European Union in the same time. It's a crazy idea. And now, you know, they are suffering from this, you know, internal conflict. Because they are only they share interest, but they are not sharing the real dream for unity. That's a problem.
Very different economies in terms of where they are, and then this idea that you can have monetary union without fiscal union without monetary union, that you can have policy.
But when the Western European leaders are talking about a multi-speed or two-speed Europe, they were afraid. They were scared by the Eastern European countries because they thought they may be marginalized. So they will use their all efforts to against this idea. But my guess is, this is the only option, only chance for the European leaders to save this union, to have different speed, to really have a core group of countries.
Thank you very much. Let me go back to Fraser Cameron for his comments on what's going to happen between Russia and European Union. Hello, Fraser. What do you think of the alleged flirtation that may be taking place between leaders of Central and Eastern European countries and Moscow? Because, Putin might be considering, look, it's time to have a rapprochement between Moscow and some of the European leaders. Because if you look at the momentum in the elections of France, Marine Le Pen said if she were to win the war, the campaign, she would proactively consider lifting the economic sanctions against Russia, which was imposed on Moscow after the annexation of Crimea. What do you think of the likelihood?
Very slim, just as like in the United States. There was lots of pro-Russia talk during the Trump campaign, but now he's in government. If you look at the policy statements of all of his top people, whether it's McMaster or Mattis or Tillerson, they're all saying sanctions will continue, NATO's the bedrock of American security, etc. It's exactly the same in Europe. There have been some talks between Putin and one or two individual countries, and one or two like Orban have suggested that sanctions should be lifted, but it's actually been a great success of the European Union over the last 2.5 years to maintain a united front on sanctions against Russia until the Minsk agreements dealing with the situation in Ukraine are fulfilled. And Merkel and Tusk have made sure that this decision will be maintained by the European Union for the foreseeable future. So I don't really see any change coming about. Certainly, even if Le Pen wins, I think there'll be a careful analysis of French real interest in terms of the relationship with Russia.
I think he hit it on the head, though. The question is, will Merkel and Tusk remain? Tusk is in a very bitter battle, which is being led against him by his own former country, Poland. So Merkel, as we discussed, has her issues. So I do think there is something.
Tusk is going to be actually reappointed in about 3 hours from now without any real opposition. It's only an internal dispute in Poland that makes the Polish government campaign against him, but it will have no impact. Tusk will be re-elected.
The Minsk process aside, Fraser, do you think Russia is currently badly needed by European leaders for the post-war reconstruction in Syria? What can you tell us about the Istanbul process that involves some of the major players like Iran, Turkey, Russia? Do you think European Union will be yet another major partner in rebuilding Syria and in facilitating the political process in Syria, which is, of course, a big success for Russian diplomacy?
Well, is it a big success? I mean, Russia's been involved in a bombing campaign in Syria, but certainly Syria has not got any political solution yet. It's still a stalemate. There's still, fighting going on. And as regards to reconstruction, Russia has said they're not going to pay for it. So ultimately, if there is some stability in Syria, the EU will certainly make a major contribution to the reconstruction. But we're still far away from that point at the moment.
Thank you very much for joining us, Fraser Cameron, our commentator from Brussels. Welcome back, Zhong Ping. What do you think of the issue of refugees and lone wolf terrorist attacks in some of the major European cities like Berlin and Paris as a result of the pretty loose policy on asylum seekers?
It's still one of the major concerns.
But do Did you see any U-turn in Angela Merkel's policy towards immigration?
Yes, certainly it has become, more strict.
She has made serious concessions with the political opponents over the issue of immigration.
I think she's doing everything now to reduce
reputation and credibility will be compromised.
She's doing everything to reduce the bad negative effect of this issue on her re-election. She's doing many things now. On one hand, she's really strengthen cooperation with Turkey. Now she's going to Syria, Libya, to try to stop the refugees to come to Europe. This is one crucial step. Secondly, she's going to strengthen, speed up the process of deportation, for people who come to Germany. I think the major competitor for Chancellor Merkel in this election is not the populist party Alternative of Germany. It is the central left. Central left suffered from the weak lead, and a lot of people do not see any chance for them to come back to the power. But suddenly they ask their leader. They got a new leader, which was the former president of the European Parliament. He has just returned to German politics, and now enjoys very high popularity. So this is a battle.
But given the big problems between the United States and the European Union across the Atlantic Ocean, and particularly following the Brexit of the United Kingdom, do you think China will be the envy for all the major players, despite the fact that China is still denied access to the fully fledged market economic status by both the European Union and the United States? So do you think the European Union will somehow change its attitude about the market economic status?
I do, and I don't think they've delayed a lot of things as it applies to China. They haven't denied it. They're simply saying that we want to see more progress. But I think their desire to see more progress will drop in relation to how they can grow. I mean, the uncertainty, you mentioned the 0.1% decrease in the expected growth rate. That's due to the uncertainty that's going around the world. Yes, there is some parts with Italy and Greece and things like that, but moreover, the trend line going into last year was 0.4% higher than they had expected. So the trend line was actually very positive. And I think if Europe sees a way out of it, remember, they're still buying billions of bonds every month in order to inject capital in. They're looking for a growth mechanism, and China might well be it.
Dumping the Belt and Road Initiative summit meeting will soon take place in China. We not only hope to expect to have more blue skies in Beijing, but we need to forecast whether the European Union will benefit from the Belt and Road Initiative, from the growing interconnectivity.
We already see clear, very, encouraging signs from European side. The first group of countries which are so interested in participating in this initiative is the eastern part, Central Eastern European countries. They have already been a major player in this cooperations. Then move to the western part. The countries like France, UK, Germany start to think about whether their economic growth can be benefited by cooperation with China in this Belt Road context. I think Europeans' economic growth will heavily rely on continued opening up, continued export, not going back to the protectionism.
China says very clearly, will safeguard free trade and globalization.
But just keep in mind some news in China. 400,000 train sets are being created here in China, mostly by the big railroad manufacturing group. The amount of time it takes to get from Beijing to ship goods from Beijing to Paris is now 12 days, versus what could be 21 to 25 days going by ship. So there are real things that are happening on this Belt and Road Initiative, because those trains can stop anywhere along. They become de facto trade routes that not only benefit China and Europe, but everybody in between. I think this is something that people have to keep a look on, and that's why I think trade with Europe will be very, very big with China.
Yes, indeed, the Belt and Road Initiative does merit attention from around the world, given the huge opportunities. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.